Good day. It's Wednesday, November 16th, 2022. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show. I am, as the name implies, Cory Morgan. And yeah, we got a really packed one today. Lots going on. I was saying to Nico before this started, and hey, I'm not going back to a daily show. That burnt the crap out of me. But there's so much to cover. It's hard to squeeze it all into a show once a week. But we're going to do that. And it's going to be a good show. So welcome to everybody. We're broadcasting all over the place. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Twitch, Rumble, and Telegram. Because social media is bouncing around all over the place. C11 is probably going to make it harder to reach out to people, so we need as many channels to get out there as we can. Good to see you guys in the comments scroll. We are live. Make use of it. Get those comments, questions out there, have exchanges with each other, send things my way. I do see them all. I don't necessarily respond to them all. It's gets pretty busy on there, but I like doing things live and knowing you're all out there and participating. So today, I've got journalist Jamil Jivani. You might know him from the Canada Strong and Free Network. He's worked with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. He's a very busy guy. And he got fired from Bell Media with his radio show, and he's suing them, and he wants to talk about it. So we're going to have a discussion about that when Jamil comes on a little later. Well, of course, our weekly business check-in. With the commodities and marketplace commodities. And I'm actually going to have a second guest on today because we have Shuvaloy Majumdar happens to be in the office, so I had to rook him in and get him on the show. He's the a Munk fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute on international affairs because we have so many international items going on today. Perfect timing to get Shuv and drag him in here and talk with him about some of these things because Canada is just... really, we used to be a world player, and nowadays it's just kind of embarrassing. So good to see you all there. Janet, Paulette, Donna, Lee, all of you popping in to say hello. Patricia out in Chauvin. I'm sure it's nice and windy and cold there as usual. Good to see you. So let's get things off with my rant. And don't forget to hang around for the end of the show as I will have my new dingleberry of the week. One of these days I'll get one of them to show up to claim their award, but there'll be a new dingleberry to award that to today. So let's see what's got me going today. As usual, though, it's not the dingleberry. He already won the first one. But the only thing worse than Justin Trudeau in Canada is Justin Trudeau outside of Canada. I mean, whether it was when he popped out on stage in India dancing the Bhangra while playing dress up in traditional Indian garb, or more recently when he held a karaoke party while in London for the Queen's funeral, the Prime Minister just can't seem to overcome his compulsion to embarrass us whenever he's overseas. If he isn't pulling bizarre attention-seeking stunts, he still embarrasses us at international summits as we're always treated to footage of international leaders ignoring or even purposely snubbing him at meetings. They don't take him seriously, and they make it clear they haven't time to indulge him when they're having important conversations. Trudeau's latest stunt, though, wasn't due to his trying to grab attention, nor was it another video of his standing on the outside looking in during a gathering. This time, Trudeau managed to put his full intellect on display when he was asked a question he wasn't ready for when he did a presser in Cambodia. CTV reporter Anne Bergeron Oliver asked him, "The Canadian Parliament has already called China's treatment of the Uyghurs a genocide. Why haven't you?" Straightforward question. Trudeau's response was so awkward, it was almost physically painful to watch him. His eyes widened in sudden terror as he knew he'd been caught flat-footed. He looked down in a panic at his notes, was surely praying that somebody had written some talking points for him. Then he looked back towards the camera with a true deer-in-the-headlights look. The pause, it seemed like an eternity, and one could almost hear the little hamsters on wheels in his head, desperately trying to compose an answer for him. Finally, Trudeau uttered an odd, disjointed word salad as he babbled about defining genocide and left the question unanswered. Trudeau is utterly incapable of thinking on his feet. He clearly has been directed to not ad-lib, and in this case, he was probably wise that he didn't try to wing it with an answer. But the leader of a country really should be able to answer questions without scripted answers, though. The other troubling thing with Trudeau's non-response was the clear terror of saying anything negative about China. The world has condemned the Chinese acts of genocide against the Uyghurs. The Canadian Parliament demonstrated rare unity when they voted 266-0 to declare a genocide. Look at that blank stare on him there. That's because playing a clip from it. Missing from the vote, though, was Trudeau and his cabinet. They chose to hide. Just how deeply controlled is Justin Trudeau by China? We've recently been getting word that China had been potentially funding candidates in the 2019 federal election. And Trudeau's been sitting on that, actually. I wonder which party those candidates were with. The Chinese hold over Trudeau runs deeper than just some campaign funding, though. China's a rogue state bullying the world, yet Trudeau will avoid being critical of them at all opportunities. When the leader of a nation is a fool, it means somebody's behind them pulling the strings. And unfortunately, our national fool doesn't even appear to be answering to a domestic master. He dances to the tune of China, much to the embarrassment and detriment of Canada. Now, since I wrote that early this morning, the clips came out of Trudeau. I guess he had been speaking to the president of China at a summit, and he went and leaked that conversation to the media. I think Trudeau felt compelled to suddenly look like he's taking a stand against the Chinese and showing some strength. And what happened? Well, then in an unprecedented public slapping down, President Xi Jinping of China basically ripped into Trudeau and spanked him in front of the cameras, and it went out on film, and people are sharing it around the world. Let's play that clip.
Everything we discussed is then leaked to the paper. That's not appropriate. And that's not how the way the conversation was conducted. If there is sincerity on your part,
free and open and frank dialogue, and that is what we will continue to have. We will continue to look to work constructively together, but there will be things we will disagree on, and we will have to continue.
Let's create the conditions first.
And of course, Trudeau ran out of the room as fast as he quickly could there. The thing that you can see there is that he's way out of his depth, and he does not command the respect of other leaders. He might have opportunities to hold China to account, but it's clear China said, no, little potato, and that is what they call him. You will answer to us. There was no pretension of respect for Trudeau when he got dressed down by the head of China there, and with Trudeau trying to make a stand for himself. It was just embarrassing and bad all around. Either way, we'll talk a little more with Shuv about that when he comes on in a bit. Let's get on to the other news, check in with Dave Naylor and see what else is happening out there in the big bad world. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Oh, Cory, it looks like you did your hair in a wind tunnel today.
Hey, I walk a few blocks to get here, mostly because I'm cheap. But yeah, it's pretty windy on the drive in, and of course the standard has not given me the makeup and hair help that I wanted to have around here, so we're just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, that was embarrassing, eh? Just watching that, it was like an angry father berating his son, and then son scurries off to his bedroom to sulk. I mean, that was awful, and that story is on our website at the moment. You can go and play the video and listen to that. Other stuff going on. We had the Ontario education workers have again threatened to go on strike. They've given a 5-day notice from CUPE, so they could be on the job or off the job as of Monday. The missile hit in Poland yesterday, which everybody thought initially came from Russia, actually turned out to be a Ukrainian defense missile that was trying to shoot down Russian missiles that I guess accidentally landed in Polish territory and killed 2 people. Our public health agency has been revealed that they spent $43 million on COVID security guards. These are the people that made sure that you were at home and under the quarantining, following the quarantining laws that you should. And we got a good story, a good scoop, I think. Danielle Smith, the Alberta Premier, sent out an email last night pleading for cash. She's about $27,000 short in paying off her campaign bills, and she's asking for donations. So that's on the site now, and there'll be lots more stuff to come this afternoon, Cory.
Right on, Dave. Well, lots to cover. Let's hope Premier Smith catches up on that. She's got a lot of other work to do rather than worrying about.
She's going to be a busy lady.
Yes. All right. Thanks, Dave. I'll talk to you after. So as we can see, lots going on there. Gina, actually, just to respond to one of the commenters saying, why are you muting the conversation between Trudeau and Z? No, it wasn't. Well, it was muted just because we're playing it in the background to supplement. We did play earlier, Gina, that video in full. And of course, it's available. If you just search it online, you can see it and hear it. And it is a little difficult to hear all of it because it's going through translators and things such as that. But that's why it was played. We're muting it because of the conversation, what was going between Dave and I. And as we can see, lots of stories coming out, lots of stuff breaking. And Dave is always on it. And this is what I'd like to remind everybody, the reason we stay independent, the reason we're media that asks the real questions is because we're subscriber-based. We do not take tax dollars. We do not take a nickel of tax dollars. We rely on you guys to subscribe, and you have in droves. Thousands of subscribers have really helped us out a lot. If you haven't yet, guys, it's $10 a month, $99 for a year, a really good deal. Come on. Lots of people spend a lot more than that for things online that are a lot less healthy than getting some good direct news from a good outlet. So get on there, take out a subscription, nag your friends and families to subscribe. Let's spread the word, and we can keep producing and covering these things. You know, I want to talk a little more about Trudeau and this thing over there, because we're seeing people trying to defend it and things like that. And I know it seems a little rough because Trudeau gets it coming and going. I mean, my monologue opened up, and I'm getting on Trudeau's case because he's being too weak with China. And then Trudeau does something to tick off China, and I mock him for the crap he catches when he does it. But you see, it does tie together. The bottom line was they had Trudeau under their thumb for so long, they didn't think twice before giving him crap for daring to speak up. They don't think it's his place to speak up outside of what they script him to say. I mean, I'm sure, I'm not going to go so far to say they're totally directly scripting Trudeau, but he's been subservient and weak to China for a long time. And when he thought he could stand up and show a strong presence on that stage, he was quickly slapped down, reminded of what his place is there. He's the boy with the pretty hair and the socks who likes doing funny dances and things like that. But when it comes to serious diplomacy and actions overseas, he's just not taken seriously, and he's out of his depth. And it happens every time he leaves our country. Something else happens. And basically, the word is diplomacy. If Trudeau wanted to take a stand against China, there's certainly plenty of things to do so with. I mean, he sure was silent for a long time on Huawei and many other things. But basically, diplomacy has to be remembered. You have to carefully approach these things. And as was said in that exchange with Trudeau, everything we discussed, this is a quote, has leaked to the newspaper, and that's not appropriate. That's not how we do things. And that's true. If you've had a one-on-one with a world leader, you don't go scampering off and leaking it right to the press immediately. And that's what that idiot did. That is why other world leaders don't take him seriously either. It's not, and I mean, I know Trudeau's trying to make a point that we do things in the open, but yes, you do most things in the open, but when it's one-on-one, informal diplomatic talks, which are important, that's the reason you go to these things in person, rather than doing it all through Zoom meetings. So you can have those interactions, those exchanges, those building relationships, or trying to influence each other. And when Prime Minister Pinhead went and took what was assumed to be confidential discussions and went straight to the press with them, he enraged his counterpart. And I know China's not somebody, we shouldn't be afraid of enraging them all the time. But you also don't pointlessly enrage them. You as I said, practice diplomacy. Trudeau is incapable of it. I said it on Twitter recently. Somebody's got to take his passport away, keep him in Canada. I know he embarrasses us when he's here too, but at least it'll be a little less so than when he's overseas. And foreign press, which aren't controlled by the federal government with things like C11, will report on it and make international news. So let's see some of the other stuff. We're basically seeing it coming all the way down the line that the hearings have been going on the Emergencies Act and whether or not it was justified, whether or not the government needed to. And basically every level of police now have testified to say, no, we did not need to invoke, and I love people sugarcoating this, the Emergencies Act. It's a form of martial law. I had that debate online with some of these turd polishers for the Trudeau bunch, Oh, it's not a suspension of human rights. Of course it is. That's exactly what the Emergencies Act is. It's saying an emergency is so dire that we're going to lift the charter rights of people to address this emergency temporarily, thankfully, and then move on. Of course you're suspending rights. You can't steal people's bank accounts without suspending charter rights. You can't force tow truck drivers into coerced labor without suspending charter rights. The Emergencies Act I tell you, if you look at the definition of martial law, that's exactly what it is, when the government suspends civil rights, no matter what the reasoning may be for it. Maybe it is. I mean, some people think it was worth it. Okay, fine. But let's not pretend it is, or it's not what it was. It was a suspension of rights. It has to be taken seriously. And every policing force, because that was the main point a lot of them had to make, and Minister Mendocino, the Minister of Lies, this is all he does. I mean, I think the guy's incapable of telling the truth. He said multiple times that police asked Justin Trudeau's government to implement the Emergencies Act. Every police force in Canada said, no, we did not. From the Ottawa Police to the Ontario Provincial Police to the RCMP to CSIS, all of them said they did not ask for it. And now even Trudeau's pet RCMP commissioner, Brenda Lucki, said she didn't believe the Emergencies Act was needed to clear out the convoy protesters. So, who did? Excuse me. So why? Well, here's an interesting one. Lucky emailed that, by the way, to Mendocino earlier, prior to the implementation of the act, but it didn't seem to matter. And we're hearing things that came out, and this was reported in Blacklocks, that I'll get on to that in a minute. So that Trudeau considered the convoy an international embarrassment. See, that's what the real reason was. It was embarrassing him. It was making international news. I mean, he does seem to be tone deaf enough not to realize that he embarrasses himself just when all on his own. He doesn't need a convoy in order to do that. He's very well capable of doing it. But sure, it made him look like he was out of control, which he was. It made him look like the country didn't respect him, which we don't. And yes, he had a large contingent of protesters camped out in Ottawa. He didn't know what to do. He panicked, and he invoked the nuclear option, and he had his little lackey Jagmeet Singh happily sign off on it because, Singh just does whatever he's told as well. And they imposed the Emergencies Act. So basically, we used the strongest tool in the legislative arsenal to try and protect Justin Trudeau's flimsy pride and personal insecurities. And these hearings are exposing that. Unfortunately, all of this, when it comes to the end of things, okay, maybe Justice Rouleau will wag his finger and say, don't do that again. But, there's not really going to be a consequence for any of this. There should be an electoral consequence, but I don't know. Toronto and Montreal seem to love that guy as much as they ever did. But at least we are airing it. I mean, the hearings are still valuable, finding out some of what went on. We really, really have to watch our personal freedoms carefully. I wish more people would understand that. The polarization. Stand up for the rights of people you don't even agree with. Likewise, with even those jackasses who keep blocking the CGL pipeline in BC, or the idiots gluing themselves to paintings. I want them charged. I think it's illegal, but we don't need to suspend the rights of everybody to try and crack down on that. It's way too big a price to pay to do that. Kim is saying, is anything I'm saying being reported in any fashion by the legacy media? Some of it is. To give credit where due, Terry Glavin with the National Post wrote a very good piece on the basically Trudeau's embarrassment in China with the leader of China with his overseas thing, where his dressing down, and gave a lot more background on the relationship between Canada and Trudeau and China. So some of them are covering it. Glavin also basically, though, got very spanked and rolled over the coals because he dared to write and report on the Kamloops residential school story and point out that, we still haven't found any bodies, and maybe there might be some questions about whether that even is a grave site. But some of the media is covering it, but you got to look for it, and there's less and less of it, that's for sure. C11, things like that, they're making sure that the media is beholden to the federal government, so they are very disinclined to be critical of them. Cheryl's saying nobody's going to be held accountable from the inquiry. No, probably not. The real way to hold them accountable, and that's where it starts to get scary, is electorally, though. I mean, in theory, we should be able to get out there and fire these guys. And people aren't doing it. They aren't doing it. They keep reelecting them. They keep rewarding them for their bad behavior. So I guess it's not much of a surprise in that case when they continue to misbehave, right? But eventually you would think people will turn around and fire them. But you see, that's part of why they start controlling communications. That's why they're trying to control the media. That's why they have things like C18, C11. They're going after the ability to get word out and have them fired. And that's scary. It's very frightening. You know, every country, every new democracy, everyone that gets formed always ensures that the freedom of press is paramount because people understand it's a very, very important freedom. I mean, if you can't report freely on your government, you are not in a free country. And this freedom most definitely bothers Justin Trudeau and his administration, and they are trying to control it. And we need to be more concerned. Michael Geist, he writes a lot on, he's a professor, writes a lot on these issues. Really, people should follow that and look into it. Because when they're trying so hard to control what gets to you, this is moving towards an authoritarian state. And it's very, very distressing. We need more press, not less. We need free press. We need them to be unrestrained. We need them to be able to speak to issues without fear of reprisal. And we're moving away from that. And it's bad for all of us, whether you support or not support. I would not support for a second a crackdown on progressive media outlet that I didn't like. I just would rather people watched us instead. But I don't want the state to be the ones doing that. We can't have that. They can't cherry pick and choose which is a good outlet and which isn't. You got to leave it open. Okay, let's get on to our guest. You've heard enough of me rambling for quite a while. I've been looking forward to this. And we've got Jamil Jivani on, and he's a very, very busy guy, this one. He's with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. He's the Senior Fellow for Diversity and Empowerment there. He's also the president of the Canada Strong and Free Network. He's a lawyer. He's a former radio host, and he's pissed off. So let's bring him in and talk about what happened with him and Bell Media. Hey, glad to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Cory. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, like I said, I was actually I was planning on reaching out to try and get you on because of your stuff with the Canada Strong and Free Network, and then you were talking about that lawsuit. There's lots to talk about.
Absolutely.
And it works well today. I mean, as you might have heard a little bit of my earlier talk, where we really got some concerns about our media and allowing, good, unfettered discourse on our media and things such as that. And perhaps if you want to lay out kind of what happened with yourself and Bell Media, because it really seems to have ended poorly when it could have really been a good show you had going there.
Yeah, and I think we've seen a lot of concerns. You raised some of them earlier about the intersection of politics and media, that we'd like to be able to say we've got trusted media outlets that are going to give us the honest news and leave it up to the audience, the viewer, the listener, to make a decision on their own about what they believe in, what they think. And I think we see over and over again that that's not really the state of mainstream media in this country. A lot of these mainstream media corporations, and certainly my experience with Bell Media affirms this, are interested in telling us what to think, not giving us information and allowing us to come to our own conclusions. And really the conflict with Bell for me, I wasn't there for very long. I only hosted a radio show full time for less than a year. And what I tried to do, which is what I thought, when they were talking about diversity and inclusion and wanting to bring different voices from different cultural and ethnic backgrounds to the airwaves, I tried to bring perspectives from communities that, like the Black community I come from in the Toronto area, for instance, and to shine light on some of the challenges that you don't get to hear often. For example, that Black Canadians are one of the most unvaccinated groups of Canadians over the last couple of years. And when I tried to explain, how Trudeau's COVID policies, how some of the provincial COVID policies would impact communities like Black Canadians, Indigenous Canadians, people who are working on the front lines in all sorts of different industries, I would get told, this is not right. Eventually, they wound up firing me because they didn't like that I was bringing these perspectives to the airwaves. But they did want me to bring the perspective when it was in line with the sort of liberal political agenda. So, the partisan nature of what Bell Media does every day. And for listeners who don't know, Bell Media owns CTV. They operate the iHeartRadio talk network throughout Canada. They do have a partisan nature to what they want to put on the airwaves that they're not willing to admit to. And then they punish people like myself who don't fall into that agenda, thinking that because I'm Black, that I would naturally be a liberal, when obviously that's not the case.
Well, yeah, and I mean, we still have some value in diverse voices, and we want to hear them. Like I'm a white guy raised out on the prairies. I've certainly got my views on issues, but I don't have any understanding of what a person of color in Toronto has had to experience or do. And being able to hear that through different people speaking on networks helps me garner some understanding. And if I guess people, we're seeking diversity, but only with a narrow messaging, that's not helping me or the minority communities in any sort of way.
And you're absolutely right, Cory. And that's the concern. When you have the biggest telecommunications company in the country thinking that they get to tell people what they're supposed to think based on their ethnicity or their culture, I mean, that is weird stuff. That is not the way any workplace should operate, but especially one of that with that much influence and that much power as Bell does. So this is why the lawsuit was important for me to file, was to sort of say, look, you cannot treat people this way. You can't look at people and say, well, because of what you look like or because of where your dad comes from, we're going to decide what politics you should have and then punish you when you refuse to be a token. It's unacceptable. And for people who might listen to this and question, how much evidence does Jamil have of this kind of partisan bias? Is it just, the normal liberal spin that we might see in the media? I'll tell you, Bell Media, in its own statement of defense, and you can read this, go on my Twitter, you can find a link to this, says outright that they fired me in part because I did not defend Justin Trudeau against criticisms that a caller made to my show, saying that he was behaving like a dictator and a globalist puppet. Now, whether you agree with that or not, that is a legitimate concern for people to have. We have members of parliament who have raised that point in the legislature, and yet Bell wants to punish a radio host for allowing a caller to say that on the radio show. The other point of partisan bias that Bell admits to in their statement of defense to the court, and again, this is in their words, you can read it for yourself, anyone who's interested. They say that I did not challenge Member of Parliament Kathy Wagenthal enough when she came on my show to explain why she opposes vaccine mandates. Now, why am I supposed to bring a duly elected member of parliament onto the show and not give her a chance to share her point of view? We did debate her points with callers immediately after the interview, but I think a conservative member of parliament has a right to come on the radio and explain why she opposes policies that impact her and her colleagues at the workplace. These are the kind of basic, simple things that every news outlet should be able to do. And yet with Bell Media, this is controversial and it's mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting you brought up that point, for example, with vaccination and some of the areas you wanted to discuss where you've got, cultural differences. We've just got statistics and demographics to show that there wasn't as high an uptake in some communities as in others. And we actually had that discussion a lot in Calgary because in Northeast Calgary, a lot of our Indian community as well had a low vaccine uptake and people were concerned about it. And we had to speak and get the views from community leaders because a lot were new Canadians. They weren't necessarily trusting of the government or medical facilities. And through those discussions that people felt more comfortable and could, choose whether or not they were going to be vaccinated. But that discussion was valuable and it was important. And to have it just coming from one side or saying we shouldn't even touch those issues, again, is putting communities at harm.
You're absolutely right. And this gets to sort of the phoniness of this whole diversity and inclusion thing. There's a genuine way to do diversity and inclusion. And I think it's what you're talking about here, Cory. Bring people in with different perspectives, trying to understand one another, trying to build genuine dialogue. But what Bell operates with is a sense of diversity and inclusion that says we want everyone to look different from one another, but ultimately think and say the same things. And if you don't fall in line, if you don't say and do what we want, then you don't count as diversity. And it's like, what is that? That is the opposite of what diversity is. Diversity means actually contending with people who have different points of view and trying to reach a middle ground. These guys want to punish people who don't have their point of view and then pat themselves on the back as if they're diversity and inclusion experts. It's like it is actually a really important issue facing our country because this is not just a Bell problem. This is happening at institutions all over the place, government offices, corporations, university campuses. And I think it's time for Canadians who believe in real diversity and inclusion to speak up and stop being bullied into silence because we're afraid somebody's going to point a finger at us and call us a bigot because we don't want to toe the line.
Yeah, well, and this could be like a bit broader. I think of some of it. I mean, there's some people who are activists within some communities or progressives, and they feel some fear when I think perhaps conservatives are evolving and moving beyond the old stereotypes of conservatives as well, and that adds some fear. I mean, when finally, and it's fair enough, you know, the conservatives didn't have a lot of members of the LGBTQ community taking part within them in the 90s and so on, but that's because people from that community got a very negative reception when they'd go to a conservative function. There were people opposing broad marriage rights and things like that. But once it was realized we could be much better accepting, you know, because there's a lot of people in the LGBTQ community who are business owners and worried about high taxes like anyone else. They come out as conservatives and they get a backlash for that. I mean, that doesn't mean they stopped being a member of that community or didn't deal with some of the challenges of that community, but they're expected by some activists that they have to toe a certain line if they're part of that community. And that's not right.
Yeah, and certainly you're right. The LGBT community has gone through that. A lot of minority groups have gone through that. I've been able to talk to all sorts of different people in my role as president of the Canada Strong and Free Network who experience this sort of stigma where when you say you're a conservative, but you're not the quote unquote typical conservative, meaning you come from maybe an unorthodox background for what people assume a conservative would be, all of a sudden people want to make you feel judged for that. And it is, in my view, despicable, because the reality is this: every group of people is ideologically and politically diverse. Every single group, women, men, different racial groups, newcomers, people who were born here. And we should expect in a society that political parties of all stripes have to compete for the votes and the support of all citizens, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. And the reality is that the left, and I use that in a broad sense, you know, liberals, socialists, people who identify with the left side of the political spectrum, they feel entitled to own people, to own their votes, to own how they think, to dictate to people based on what they look like and where they come from, how they're supposed to think about laws and policies in this country. It is textbook racism, and yet somehow the liberals and the left have convinced everyone that they aren't racist and they get to point a finger at the rest of the world. It is very backwards, because I would argue that some of the most racist thinking today is embraced by elite liberals. It's not embraced by the average working class, middle class family. It's people like what we've been talking about with Bell Media, who want to control others and tell them this is how you must think and feel because of what you look like.
And there are a few things more insulting than tokenism. I mean, no matter where it's applied. What's the timeline like on your action at this point? I know these things can move pretty slowly through the the gears of the legal world. I mean, how's the suit been going?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. These things can move slowly. It all kind of just depends on the people involved. It depends on how the process goes. You know, we've gone through what's called the pleading stage, where we submitted our statement of claim, Bell submitted their defense, and then we replied to their defense. So, you know, we've got those pieces of the process done, and the rest of it could take months, could take weeks. We don't know yet. So we've got to just stay, focused. And, it's one of those things where it's difficult to read dishonest things about yourself in the media. And I think every public figure goes through that. Bell said some things that were really unfair in their defense, but this is that comes with it. You go through the process, you stand up for what you believe in, you take the hits as they come, and you hope that you get justice in the end. So that's what I'm focused on. And, we're going to keep doing our thing, and hopefully good things will come out of it.
Yeah, well, and I noticed in your statement of claim, the asks as far as this kind of suit go aren't unreasonable. It's not like you're asking for $100 million or trying to bankrupt the corporation. You want to be compensated for an improper dismissal, and there's a punitive factor, but it's not huge. But I guess most of us also is hopefully exposing this, and the goal would be for Bell Media and others to realize you're on the wrong course. Don't do this. It's doing a disservice to people who follow the media, people within minority communities, and just people in general.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, there are good people who work at Bell, like some of my former colleagues, for example, and they should not be subjected to these kinds of policies. I worry whether some of them are going to be fired and manipulated and punished in the same ways. So yeah, it's money's always part of every lawsuit, but really, there's a point here beyond just money, which is there's a right and a wrong. There's a way people deserve to be treated. Employees of all backgrounds, all races deserve high quality respect. And when they're not being given that, especially by one of the biggest and richest corporations in the country, I think that corporation, in this case Bell, has to answer for its own behavior.
Yeah, well, and I hope this gets settled well. So maybe moving beyond that then, just since I've got you, how are things going with the Canada Strong and Free Network? Can you explain a little bit of what that's about and your role with it? Because that's a relatively recent, you're joining it as the president of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I joined in June, so it's only been a few months now. And for people who haven't heard of the Canada Strong and Free Network before, we used to be called the Manning Center. So we've been around for 15 years, but most of those years we had a different name. And what we do is we organize conservative conferences all around the country, conservative events. We want conservatives to connect with each other. We believe that there's strength in numbers. And we also believe conservatives should not be made to feel alone, to feel isolated. A lot of, the activist tactics on the left are designed to make you feel like you are an island unto yourself if you don't go along to get along and join the crowd. So we do these conferences because we want to bring people together, bring people of different ages, whether it's people who were active when Preston Manning was in political office, or people who were active when Stephen Harper was the Prime Minister of Canada, or now people who are looking at maybe the future, excited about a possible Pierre Poilievre prime ministership and saying, I want to get involved in the movement and start, building ideas and networks and relationships that might help guide the country in a better direction. So we encourage people who like to come to our events to learn about what we do. We do virtual events and in-person events. You can visit our website, canadastrongandfree.network, where you can learn all about us. Our next big conference is in Ottawa in March. So I encourage you to look out for updates on that. I'm really excited for what we're putting together for that March program.
Great. Well, I really appreciate your work. I mean, in that as well. I mean, it's good for getting a lot of young conservatives or even the older ones. I mean, just to become more effective communicators or working on things. And as well, of course, I mean, I got some self-interest, but I want to see as much free press as possible and as much discourse as possible. So I appreciate you're taking that fight up rather than just letting it go and putting it behind you. And of course, I appreciate you coming on and talking to us today. Is there anything else you'd like to add before I let you go?
No, I just want to say, I really appreciate the work you do, Cory. Like, I spent a lot of time talking about where media is failing, but we've got a lot of strong, new, independent outlets, shows like yours, thinkers like you, and others at Western Standard. So appreciate the work you guys do to bring attention to these important issues.
Great. Well, I wish you the best on your legal actions and your future endeavors with the Macdonald-Laurier and the Canadian Strong and Free Network. So thanks again for coming on. I hope we get to talk again soon.
Me too. Take care.
Thanks. So yes, that was Jamil Jivani, and as we heard, he's really pushing back. He's not taking things lightly, and who should? When you feel you've been incorrectly fired, and especially again, it's not just somebody from a run-of-the-mill job fired for a run-of-the-mill reason. This is distressing. This is control of messaging. This is the threat that every media outlet is under right now. Part of the reason we stay independent, by the way, is our advertisers. So let's take a second and listen to one of our best ones there, the Canadian Shooting Sports Net Association, and I'll get back to you.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny.
Right, if you enjoy your firearms, guys, get on there, CSSA-CILA.org. Unlike Derek, I know that URL off by heart. But no, it's a great group, guys, and take out a membership. That's the way you can protect those rights, and it's very important for yourself. They're a great sponsor and a great group. So yeah, I just want to piggyback more on the communication, media, C11, C18, these threats. And these threats we have too, in some ways that are more insidious. We don't see what's going on in those communications behind closed doors. And Jamil exposed it. We've seen that with some CBC reporters who've left and started their Substacks and said, I just couldn't take the control anymore, the controlling of the messaging. And it's got to hurt, for those who were drawn to journalism, the ones that, went to school for it, rose through the ranks, did their time in the field, and then to find out they can't actually get their own messaging out there. I mean, again, it depends on what you're doing, whether a reporter or a columnist or opinion or what you're choosing to talk about. But in a discussion show format, such as what Jamil had on that radio show, that's where you definitely want to see a lot of point of views. It's a show like this. I mean, it's getting out there. It's speaking, and when it's strangled, nobody's winning. And you don't hear about that. He's exposing it. That's what's good about this, And that's something that happened before with Daniel Smith. Here's some of the irony, at Global, Chorus, that whole network, and it was QR77 was the radio station Calgary where she had her show. And boy, if you want to listen to a lot of anti-Smith stuff, listen to some of those radio shows now. Man, they are crabby at Premier Smith. But of course, she left them. And not only did she leave them, though, she exposed them. Because when she went out, she talked about some of the communications coming from John Voss on, some of the spankings she got for interviewing who they thought were the wrong people or talking about the wrong subjects. And one of the worst, I think, of all of them was with Kaylin Ford, who she suffered from a complete character assassination from an idiot. And then that was picked up by CBC and Duncan Kinney and Press Progress and a whole bunch of others. And she's pushing back and she's suing, and I wish her every success on this. Kaylin Ford is not taking that lightly. But during that period, basically, there was a bunch of BS released about Kaylin Ford when she was running for the nomination for the UCP. And she is a very smart young woman. She would have been fantastic, I think, in the UCP cabinet and still be there today. But they basically slaughtered her, pushed her out of her spot for that nomination. Or I think she was already nominated and she ended up giving it up, but she never ran in the election. And it turned out, again, it was all lies. Well, Daniel Smith dared to have Kaylin Smith on her show. Or Kaylin Ford. Dared to have her on and just let her speak her point of view. That's all. Exactly what you're supposed to do as a radio host. And the woke mob went ballistic. But you got to remember, this is tied to Duncan Kinney. This is tied to Press Progress, which is tied to the Broadband Institute, which is tied to Alberta Federation of Labor and old Gil McGowan. They get their union maggots to get out there and start screaming at sponsors and to get out there and start shouting down. And basically that's what happened is they screamed, they phoned every sponsor for that show, they phoned every outlet, and those sponsors got scared. They phoned QR77, and that interview was pulled. It's not even in the archives anymore. And Smith was spanked and told, don't you do that again. That's the state of media. And people didn't know that. They didn't hear much about that because that was behind closed doors. But once Smith left, then she explained what she was being put through when she was in that station. No wonder she chafed there. And like I said, the irony, okay, you guys didn't like her, but you know what? If you'd treated her better, she would have stayed in radio and she wouldn't be the premier today. You guys, you sure can't stand her as a premier, but maybe you would have liked her better if she was still with the radio show. But our outlets are suffering. But I mean, again, we're expanding, we're getting better. And I like to think that things will develop. I mean, we will come out of these assaults on free press, assaults on free speech and free discourse. And I look at some of this. This is some of the stuff that, getting to Bell again. They were whining to a Senate Communications Committee because they're looking for more handouts, looking for more subsidies, looking for more bailouts. And here's a quote from it. They wrote to senators saying, local media in Canada is in a crisis. Pre-pandemic combined annual advertising revenues for television and radio stations, local ones, declined by $700 million from $3.8 billion in 2010 to $3.1 in 2019. And that's before the pandemic. Now, that's because the world's changing, guys. And you aren't adapting with it. You're dinosaurs. You suck. You've got to learn to pivot, or maybe it's beyond repair. Maybe we do have to let these outlets go broke. Likewise with the newspapers. Unfortunately, it's sad to see it go. It really is. I mean, I've talked about that. I used to love the big, thick Sunday sun that I would get on Sundays and drink my coffee in my bathrobe and nurse my hangover and smoke my cigarettes and read through that great big, thick Sunday newspaper with all the opinion and news and everything packed into it, even the cartoons. Now, I mean, you can't even line a birdcage with a newspaper. It's so thin. There's so little to it because they can't afford to make it bigger. The advertising has changed. The world has changed. Things have gone online. And these publications are going down. They don't know how to adapt themselves to this. But too damn bad. Too damn bad. And so they're talking about how local television and local radio outlets can't make money in this market. Thus, we have to subsidize them and bail them out. No. Look how cost effectively we can come up with local things. The Western Standard, we're here with a studio. We've got a great product going out. We've got good sound. We've got Nico on it. And we are doing this for a fraction of the cost of these old dinosaurs. That's the thing. I think, they're too big to sustain themselves anymore. They don't know how to do lean production anymore. They're just too bloated, too overmanaged. Maybe they're even running old equipment, but they just can't change. So maybe it's time just to let them go by the wayside. Something will come up. Bailing them out isn't the way to do it. That's not going to encourage them to streamline themselves and come up with a better product and a profitable product. I mean, we're finding that here at the Standard. It's a tough go. We're not all rolling in lucre here. There's not giant amounts of money, but we're getting by and we're doing all right and we're expanding. People have subscribed and we learned some hard lessons and we had some successes. And others like True North, like Rebel, even, progressive ones, Canada Land, though I kind of wonder about some of the crap they gave air to, but they might get sued over that. So we'll see what happens there. Media will adapt. Voices will adapt. But that's where we got to watch out for, again, C11, C18, efforts to actually make it illegal for you to get your message out there or very much more difficult to bypass the old channels. Then it starts getting pretty scary. Let's see. Let's look at a little more news stuff here. Satellites. This is one of my pet subjects anyways, because I spent years in the Arctic and I get frustrated with our lack of development there. But I guess the satellites we have, some of Canada's surveillance of the Arctic. You got to remember, our Arctic is our most vulnerable border. It really is. I mean, it bounds with Russia and a whole lot of other nations that poke around up there. And we can't watch it very closely. I mean, it's pretty damn tough to get up there. And we had satellites dedicated to that. We spent the money. We put them up there to watch. Well, they're coming to their end in 2026. They're wearing out. And, renewal in this statement as well of aircraft, satellites, infrastructure, it's all been delayed and basically it's falling apart. We're going to get to a point pretty soon, I think, where Putin's going to be able to go up there and set up oil rigs and drill and just, fill up tankers in summertime and just pump it out of there. And we wouldn't even know they're doing it, much less be able to do anything to stop it. We got this, ongoing maintenance and refit costs for Canada's submarine fleet, and they top $3 billion right now. And they've been in dry dock since they spent another year dry dock this year. They're not even out there, and we're spending billions trying to fix these things up. And fleet, they aren't nuclear. And I'm not talking about for nuclear weapons. If people understand nuclear submarines, I mean, you think of submarines, the engines run, they consume oxygen. When they go underwater, the older ones, the diesel ones, they go on battery power so they can go underwater. But of course, it's limited time you can stay. And the modern, I should say, nuclear subs have been around since the 70s, though Canada doesn't have any of them. They are nuclear powered, so they can get underwater and stay under for a long, long time, which means they can get under the ice caps. They can get into the Arctic. Canada is one of the world's largest Arctic nations, and we can't even get there. We're still spending billions trying to fix up these old diesel subs. If people remember the history of those, we bought them used from England back in the 90s, and I believe it killed one or two of our sailors when they were just trying to transport them here because they had a fire on board of one of them. We got money to pour all over the place, it seems. But when it comes to these important things, and I mean, that kind of ties into our international reputation too. Why we aren't respected overseas, why foreign leaders don't respect us, because we don't pull our own weight. I mean, I understand we only have, 38 million people here. We only have so much money. We're not going to have a large standing army. But if we want to participate on the world scene as a player, we want to be that world-class nation, we can't even get to our own Arctic. Of course they don't take us seriously. And it's not just Trudeau. This has been a long decline. The defunding and degradation of our defense and military has been going on for a long time. Trudeau is just the latest of them. And finding that balance, I don't know. I don't want to see some, money expended where we're carrying a standing force of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. We don't need it and it doesn't warrant it. But we should certainly be able to get to every corner of our country, every one of them, including the Arctic. And we don't have nuclear icebreakers. We don't have nuclear subs. We can't even get up there. If people want to look it up, look into the Rangers program. They've still got those guys up there with Ross rifles going around on snowmobiles. I mean, it's kind of a make-work thing for some people up there. It was an important thing back in the Cold War because, yes, you did actually need people that far north to watch for things. If you're suddenly seeing Russian planes coming overhead or missiles or something like that, that'd be that first line of defense, the do line. But now we do have more modern ways to deal with these things. But we have to upgrade our equipment to do it. And we aren't doing it. We just seem to be spending our money on woke causes and climate change. And can't seem to let things go. Let's see. Yes, Canada's 4 Victoria-class submarines form the core of Royal Canadian Navy's underwater surveillance capability, said the inquiry. Covert, well-armed, and capable of patrolling vast distances. Well, not if they've been in dry dock this long. And again, they can't stay there. What else have we got going on, blowing up out there? Let's see. A northern naval base, Pamela Jones, Kenny's saying, I don't know. I don't know if we need a full base up there because it is difficult. You know, Inuvik is seasonally accessible. It's not deep water. You get all that silt going on. But I mean, it's things to consider. Or the guests I had last week talking about deep water ports on Hudson Bay, and not just at Churchill. There's other river outlets and areas there that we could consider. Or again, if you have those long range capability, you don't need the base to be up there. You just need the ability to get up there and deal with it. And we just seem to be neglecting that. Kim is saying Inuit Rangers, they're still needed, but they aren't getting the recognition that they deserve. Yeah, that's the ones I was speaking of. Inuit, Inuvialuit as well, because that was the ones up by Tuck and Nuvik, and they're still a good patrol for up there. I mean, they also watch for things like poachers or other issues that may be happening up in some isolated regions. And they're not getting much recognition. I'm not sure how much they're doing up there anymore. One of the reasons I got to admit, though, is they still hang on. When I was up there, they still had those really ancient World War II rifles, though. I guess they're very reliable in those very cold conditions that, of course, you encounter when you're up that far north, and you need those. I mean, it's not like they're going to hold off the Russian hordes with those, but it's an area where you don't want to be unarmed or not have a reliable firearm when you're up that way. Oh, by the way, one of the things I've seen in my notes, I meant to ask Jamil while he was on, but this is some of the woke, crazy stuff they were asking him to do. This was one of the big areas where he got disciplined. I guess when he was the radio host and Canada Day came at that time, and we were basically being told by the CBC and CTV and the progressive groups and everything else that we're supposed to hang our heads in shame and we aren't supposed to, recognize or celebrate Canada Day. He was supposed to basically denounce Canada Day, and he wouldn't do it. He said, no, I want to recognize it. I don't think we should be going into that. And, it's my show. Apparently it wasn't. I mean, in the end, I guess, the bosses signed the check and they could fire him. And that's what happened to him. And the price was paid in a bad way for that, unfortunately. So let's see what else we're getting into. My guest is a little late. We're going to have the ag report here pretty quickly. Let's see what else is breaking on Western Standard while we're at it. They kill me. This is the beautiful thing with being live. I love it. I love the conversations back and forth. There we go. Pamela saying Ross rifles were World War I. Sorry, Lee Enfields was World War II. Okay. I mean, again, I'm not an expert on these things. I do know that they were one of those two. It was like a 303 type caliber, and I guess they were very reliable rifles up there as well. Oh, yeah. Here's something to go on about. Twitter, of course, my favorite playground. Elon Musk, his purchase of it. And boy, that shows as well how much the progressives can't stand open discourse, can't stand seeing free discussion going on and things such as that. Because why are you going so haywire over Musk buying a social media outlet? Well, we're seeing it. And they're doing everything they can to sabotage it. Now, to be fair, it looks like Musk was coming in like a bull in a china shop. I mean, this is a big company, and he's going in just kind of ripping around and realizing he tore off some band-aids he probably shouldn't have, and he's trying to paste them back on. But, I mean, some of the things that they're going nuts about. So I guess he's, for staff, he said no more free lunches. Yeah, the staff with Twitter were getting a free lunch at the cafeteria every day. They've gone postal about that. And I've heard some people say, yeah, it's outrageous. Really? 99% of the world has to buy their own damn lunch. Then we're talking about common sense cuts within some of these bloated institutions and social media things. And we're seeing it as well with, I think some of these, all of them have grown too fast. They've got way too much rot. I think perhaps when they clean them up, when they streamline them, they've got to be a little more careful than Musk is doing. But Amazon just laid off, 10,000 people. We've seen Facebook is, or Meta as they're calling it, is laying off thousands of people. I'm being reminded of like back, if people remember the dot bomb, in the 90s when people realized the internet's huge, it's big, it's growing, it's going to be a world changer. And it was. But nobody really figured out how to monetize it yet. And everybody's buying any company, if it looked like a tech company or an internet company and it got publicly traded, their stocks just went through the roof, but there was nothing to most of them. And eventually it had to collapse, and it did. I think we're seeing a similar correction happening right now with all of these social media giants. They just weren't sustainable to begin with. They grew too fast. I mean, they can make money, but they've got to clean the ranks. You got to get realistic. You got to run it like a proper business, like any other business. And that's what's happening now. But I mean, it also was the fact that the messaging control, and that's of concern. Okay, well, we'll see. Is Shuv out there, perhaps? We can bring him in, and I'm not sure what's quite happened with the ag check-in, but it's difficult to schedule these things. He might have gotten tied up. They are running a busy business there. That's the Marketplace Commodities, these guys, and you can see them on our website all the time. They've got their stuff on the front page at the westernstandard.news. And typically he'll come in and give us an ag update, but he's running behind today. So that's why I'm rambling baselessly while I wait for my next guest, if we can get Shuv in here, and we can discuss some other things to wrap stuff up. Where is my... Oh, yeah, the Ontario education workers are going back on strike. Dave mentioned that, eh? So parents are held hostage yet again. This is another one of the areas I've gone on about. If we want streamline, if we want our kids to do well, we've really, really got to have it out with organized labor. And so, I mean, Ford, again, speaking of clumsy bull in a china shop sort of way to approach things, using the notwithstanding clause backlashed on him so badly that he backed off. But now, yet again, parents are all looking at their kids being sent home from school pretty quickly, with strike notice being served yet again. What a frustrating time when the kids haven't been able to attend regularly for years already. I mean, this is a real problem. I mean, and plus the mask lunacy going on. I mean, people are talking about locking down schools again. I don't know if we're ever going to get back to normalcy again. But a large part of it, who's pushing for these mask mandates all the time? Well, look, lo and behold, it's Gil McGowan and the unions again. Why? What's the big union interest in these? And spare me, we've got the numbers. I mean, children, when it comes to COVID and things like that, fortunately, typically aren't terribly at risk of any long-term effects from it. But it's just another area of negotiation, another area to push. And again, the ones who are paying the price for it, as always, in the end, are the students. They always say it's for the students, but somehow when these negotiations are for the sake of the students, the best thing for the students is always a raise for the union members. Go figure. But yeah, it's quite a mess going on there. AB Free saying government education causes more harm than good. I would just like to see, and I talked about that before, just more choice. I mean, that's where I come back to my free market approach to just about everything. Get more choice in the education system. There is room for organized labor. But I mean, let parents vote with their wallets, vote with their feet. Make those kids into assets rather than, negotiable hostages to be held every time the organized labor gets upset with their deal and how things are going for them. And perhaps, again, we'll see more stability. I'm really worried. We had a few years of kids going through school who've had a disruptive, from COVID, and I'm not blaming government for every aspect of that, but we just can't seem to leave them alone. And in Ontario, and again, it's just stressful for parents. I know that schools aren't supposed to be babysitters, but there is a reality. You are reliant on the schools to make sure that your kids are dealt with throughout the day. And when it gets disrupted like that over and over, it causes problems for parents in the workplace, causes stresses around the household. It's a challenging thing all around. And yeah, Cindy's saying it's time for students to strike and walk out of classes every day. Yeah, well, I can see the frustration and turnabout in that sense, I guess. But again, it's just more disruption for the kids and doesn't actually help them much in the end of things. So, yeah, I don't know. I just got to hope for the best. And I hope they don't get gouged too hard. I mean, we can't just keep pouring money in everything. I mean, there's another thing I listened to on the radio the other day, some coalition, and you know, they gave them headlines all the way across for this coalition for living wage. Remember, it's not minimum wage anymore, it's living wage, this arbitrary apparent living wage that everybody has to pay. And they determine in Canmore, for example, in Alberta, yeah, it's an expensive place to be. It should be $32 an hour now, really. So the starting dishwasher 4-hour a day position should start at $32 an hour. That's what their logic is. And, you know, these same ones are the same ones that howl about inflation. They howl about the cost of living pressuring people. You can bet they're not going to pay $60 for a cheeseburger in Canmore. And they shouldn't. And these positions, hey, they're important. You got to start somewhere. Man, when I owned my pub, I tell you, nights sucked when I didn't have a dishwasher in because it meant I had to. But I had to pay an amount that was enough to retain a dishwasher, and I did so. And actually, that was the starting position. I had a young man who was in the dish pit for a while. Then he was making pizzas. Then he was serving at tables once he turned 18, and he made some good money on the floor. You start somewhere. All right, enough rambling out of me. I've got Shuv in here, and let's talk about some more international stuff. So, hey, thanks for letting us rook you in here since you happen to be visiting. You know, I've had you on the show before, but it's always been remote.
It's always good to be home.
Yeah. The weather's not too bad for your visit this time.
Home, always Calgary, always home. It's all. There's never a bad time to be here.
Right on. So yeah, we've pulled you in, and I mean, I don't really have a full agenda, but there's a lot to cover. Anyways, your specialty with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute is international affairs. I believe you were a consultant for Prime Minister Harper as well, and you worked in some capacities back then. It's sort of your area of expertise, and boy, we got a lot of international diplomacy challenges going on right now, I guess you could say.
Can definitely say that.
Basically, just to kind of throw it out there, our China-Canada relationship, like what on earth is going on right now?
It's incredible. I mean, that's a great question. I think a lot of people are asking that, including our own allies.
Yes.
Because, you know, as you know, Cory, around the world, governments have been pronouncing on what they're defining as an Indo-Pacific strategy, this geography of Indian and Pacific Oceans. And it's really a discussion about how to manage China's rise and what to do about it. All our allies have pronounced. The Five Eyes have pronounced. The NATO allies have pronounced. Europe has pronounced. We have provincial jurisdictions in Canada that have pronounced what their interests are in the Indo-Pacific. But for some reason, this government, several years in, has yet to announce what its position actually is. You hear Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, Innovation Minister François-Philippe Champagne, saying some things about decoupling and how to think about China's risk to the Canadian economy. You hear troubling reports from Canadian intelligence sectors about Chinese influence operations inside this country. And you know that our rivals have become more ambitious in the last number of years. So where does Canada stand is a great question. Where do we go next is even a harder question. But as you know, this week we've seen Prime Minister Trudeau do summitry. He's been at ASEAN meetings in Cambodia, and now he's in Bali at the G20 meetings. These conversations between governments are an opportunity to advance the interests of the country and to compare notes with your counterparts, whether they're friendly or not. And what we're seeing is a government that has been increasingly cut out of all the important military and economic arrangements that are vital to the Canadian interest moving forward. Today, we saw news coming out from Bali of an exchange that the Prime Minister had with President Xi Jinping of China. And it didn't go so well. You could see that their dialogue had never actually been in an official meeting format. It seems that the Canadian Prime Minister's office leaked, a private conversation that was had for the purposes of trying to show that they're doing something about China in Canada. And that offended the Chinese premier in terms of what his expectations were in how governments interact with each other. And he was quite dismissive of the Canadian Prime Minister. And so it's brewing as a question as to whether or not Canada has the kind of influence it requires to be able to take on our rivals and work as an ally with our partners. It was a pretty sad display, to say.
Yeah, well, that was kind of the root of the worst of it all was, as you said, dismissive, disrespected. I mean, just not considered even a serious player. I mean, he wouldn't, even if he was enraged with President Biden, I don't think that the Chinese premier would have so publicly berated Biden in a manner such as that.
No.
He would do things through channels. It's diplomacy. It means, yeah, sometimes you can smile when you loathe somebody, but you work on what you're going to do. And their clumsy release of what was a personal dialogue between those two just fractured any possible influence even further.
Well, you wonder, if you, even for our friends, you wonder if you have a conversation that's an honorable discussion about key issues, some things that are easier, some things that are harder, and you're doing it professionally, then there are expectations that you have those conversations professionally, and you have an agreed set of sense of what you would say in public. And only rarely would you leak information that was discussed privately for political gain. It wouldn't be something that I would recommend to anybody. And so friends or rivals alike, you wonder whether they would ever trust a private conversation they'd have with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau again.
Yeah. Well,
and second, Xi Jinping clearly saw that there was a recording going on during his conversation with Prime Minister Trudeau. And he clearly had no problem saying, there's a way business is done. This is not how it's done. And Prime Minister, you decide how you want to engage professionally or otherwise. What's really tragic about all this is that, the Trudeau government has spent the last several years laying the doormat to Chinese influence operations in Canada. They're very quiet about how they criticize Beijing and how Beijing's agents inside Canada have been bullying our people. And a lot of this in so many ways is even if you try to have a good relationship with Beijing, as I would argue that the Trudeau government has been trying to do, you still can't have a good relationship with Beijing because there's no terms, no trust to be able to actually succeed at that.
Yeah, well, you've got to command at least a little bit of respect, but it's that other trickle down. I mean, I spoke to that earlier in the show. The point of these face-to-face summits, though, I mean, they could do this through Zoom, they could do this through remote meeting nowadays,
and they have, yeah.
But the importance of being able to do this, some of that informal conversation, the stuff that you did chat off screen, I guess you could say, and you're not signing agreements, but you're discussing things, and that's sort of that discretion that Trudeau's breached this time. And a lot of other world leaders are going to feel very reticent about saying anything around him any longer because, well, what if it becomes interesting for him to leak that down the road on me?
Yeah, it's all about trust and candor, and you can conduct yourself honorably even if it's with people you don't like, and it's a kind of a quality of leadership that I think Canadians crave.
So how do we deal with China, though? I mean, we are integrated and dependent on them for a lot of things. I mean, hey, we can get on a high horse, but you know what? A lot of Canadians will complain if those consumer products go up in price, and a whole lot of them come from China. We sell, was it $3.5 billion a year in coal to China? Something I'm sure Trudeau doesn't like to trumpet, but that's a big industry for us.
Yeah.
We would pay a terrible price for totally disconnecting ourselves from Chinese relations as well. How do we work with this country?
Well, when you deal with a country as big as China, you deal with it as a concert of nations. And so when you have a series of commercial transactions that you think are important, and they are good commercial transactions that are underpinned by the rule of law, that if something goes wrong, that there's a process to deal with it, and that these commercial transactions won't be drawn in for political abuse, then you can have a very prosperous, successful relationship. Canada had accomplished that with China for many, many years, until China started to exploit those commercial deals with Canada for political reasons. The most vivid example and experience Canadians would have had would have been with the arrest of those two Canadians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, who were held hostage on a public policy question around Huawei's determination, its presence in Canada as a supplier of 5G technology. That is beyond the pale, a partner you can't do business with. And so when you think about the present relations that Canada has to manage, as do other countries, you have to work with other countries to create the rules that China would abide by so that it can be a mutually beneficial deal. The problem has been that up until the last number of years, China has been imposing its own decoupling on us. Xi Jinping many years ago had said that he wanted to create a dual circulation economy for China, meaning he wanted to create an economy for China that was reliant on its own resources and its own manufacturing, its own productivity. He didn't want to rely on international trade as a means to continue to fuel China's rise. The other side of what he has done is that he has done disproportionate deals, meaning he will expect market access to Canada, but not provide the same to China. Or he would take out his investment model through his Belt and Road Initiative to smaller developing countries around the world and say, I will colonize this part of your country for a period of 100 years. I will bring in my own workers to develop a port or a railroad, a highway piece of infrastructure, and I will harvest the resources I need from your country and the data I am curious about of your people for China's rise alone. That's not a good commercial deal.
No.
So for Canada, what do? We have to work with our partners, our like-mindeds, and we have to be steadfast when it comes to understanding the risk that China poses. Australia, final point. Australia had to experience Chinese political intimidation based on their presence in Australian real estate markets. This happened a number of years ago. And Australia said, enough. And they divested, they decoupled, they paid a heavy price for doing so. Australia is much more closer to China geographically, has to deal with the realities of China more viscerally, and they have been more successful at delinking and de-risking the kind of leverage that China has than Canada. Canada's trade with China is much less than is perceived. And in terms of making the right decisions for Canadians in the long term, what's going to hurt the middle class in Canada more, what's going to make life more costly for lower income Canadians are unreliable partners that create massive instability, and we can't stand for that.
No, and again, these summits are important. I mean, as a nation by ourselves, okay, we have limited influence, but if you can get together with other nations that are impacted by this, I mean, these are the opportunities.
That's why we build alliances.
And unfortunately, we just don't seem to be doing a very good job of it right now.
No.
I hope that it turns around. Well, I appreciate you coming in on a short notice like this,
anytime,
talking to us about it. I mean, and I know you write columns for the National Post and things with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Where can we find out more what you're up to, Shuv?
The Macdonald-Laurier Institute. It's www.macdonald-laurier.ca. It's the home for all of our writing, and my colleagues and I are always energetically advancing the interests of Canada. Independent thinking. So thank you for letting us plug our perspectives a bit.
Oh, I'm glad you came in to add some more nuance to just, a show of my ranting and raving all the way through. But, I
like your ranting and raving.
Some,
long-time fan.
Yeah, well, thanks. Just some, discussion of the real matters at hand, too, because it's really important. I mean, we got a fragile economy right now, and somebody at the helm who's perhaps not steady as we would hope.
A lot of people are getting hurt, and we require leaders of conviction right now.
Great. Well, thanks again, and I'll talk to you after the show.
See you. Thank you.
Thanks. So it is Shuvaloy Majumdar, and yes, he's with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and lots of excellent stuff to add. I mean, just today, and as I said, search him out. Look at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and the National Post for some of those columns, and he's on Twitter as well. He's not as abrasive and getting in your face on Twitter like I am and having that sort of fun, but always lots of very valuable discourse and discussion on those international things. So let's get back. We can catch up on things. I see he's in the lobby now. We have Jim Buzicum of Marketplace Commodities, and we can talk about some of the agricultural stuff here. Hey, how's it going, Jim?
Good. Thanks, Cory.
Appreciate you seeing today. So maybe, just kind of get an update on the market change in the last week with some of these agricultural canola, wheat, barley items such as that.
All right, I'll give you a quick summary of the three different commodities. Over the last week, nearby canola futures have moved from a peak of $900 per ton down to $875 today, with most of the price lower, the move lower happening today. We had a $17 drop in the futures today. Significant move. Futures markets do remain in inverse, meaning that the nearby January contract is trading at roughly a $15 ton premium to the March, May, and July futures. So this, along with the strong basis, indicates that demand from crushers and exporters is still very strong. Looking at the wheat market, it's been volatile with world markets, Russia-Ukraine issues. But over the week, it actually has a net gain of roughly 25 cents per bushel, countered by a strong Canadian dollar. So actually the price on the prairies is roughly about the same. We still see values trading anywhere from back to the farmer at $12 to $12.25 a bushel. Feed wheat values are about 50 cents a bushel back from that, $11.50 to $12. And in the feed barley market, Lethbridge cash barley moved from $4.55 down to $4.45 as feedlots continue to switch to more available and competitively priced U.S. corn. End users seem well covered for the remainder of 2022. And most are looking now to purchase late winter and springtime feed supplies. Back to you, Cory.
Sure. Well, and you'd mentioned the impacts. I mean, things geopolitics. We got bigger issues, and I understand producers can't watch for everything in these things, but they have some direct impact. I mean, the world, is a fragile place, as I was saying to Shuv before, on the international scene, and the incident with the Russia and Ukraine missile landing in Poland. People worry about an escalation of things over there. It looks like it might have calmed down for now, but that really still impacts all of these commodities, doesn't it?
It really does. And actually, what's interesting when those things happen is you actually see it on the markets almost immediately. So it was roughly around 11 o'clock a.m. yesterday. Markets were actually down yesterday. And that news came out about that missile landing in Poland. We had wheat futures close up about 25 cents a bushel, corn up 10 cents a bushel. Markets closed at 12:15 p.m. And overnight, of course, it came out that things are, de-escalated, I guess, if you could say that. And we look at it today and everything's actually back down again. Markets, back to actually following the trend, which was moving lower over most of this week. So, you see it in the markets almost quicker than anything.
Yeah, well, people watching with their dollars, and it reflects things fast. I mean, we're in this world where trades can happen so quickly, and I mean that's part of what you guys offer as a service. Is this is real time marketing, because you do have to watch for these immediate upswings and downswings, or I guess also for clients just making sure they don't panic when we have occasional things that might change prices in a short order.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, what I tell our clients is just be proactive with your marketing so that when these events take place, you do not have to react to it right away. You can take your time and sort it out and see what happens. I mean, because over the course of 24 hours, it's basically a net zero in terms of markets.
Yeah. Okay. Well, where can people find more information on you guys? I see the number down below there, 403-394-1711, and marketplacecommodities.com, I guess.
Yeah, that'd be it. And you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow our daily market report. It's posted on Twitter each day, and get to meet our traders. And obviously, we hope to do business with those that have the commodities for sale. Excellent. Well, thanks again for checking in with us this week, Jim, and we'll talk again next week. Okay. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Thank you. That was Jim Buzicum from Marketplace Commodities. And yes, again, as producers, I mean, it's a business like anything else. I'm no expert in it, but I see it similar to a lot of other financial advice. Don't panic. Watch your commodities, whether they're agricultural or anything else, but listen to the experts before you start buying or selling like crazy. I bought a bunch of Bitcoin last year. That worked out well for me. Maybe I should have listened to some other people before I bought that. But I didn't buy that much. I didn't have that much money to start with. So, okay, I'm going to finish things up with the Dingleberry of the week. I get, this new award I'm giving because there's always somebody worthy of it. It jumps to my eye, and I don't want to just do it on Twitter. And this one, I know I'm going to get a bunch of the emails and messages from folks who are upset with me, but I'm sorry, guys. It's too bad. This week's Dingleberry Award goes to Donald Trump, as he has come out and announced he's going to be running for president yet again. Look, guys, whether you love the guy, whether you hate the guy, if you want the Democrats in for one more term, have him run in the next general election in the United States. He's turned toxic. The midterms have indicated that. Whether you liked or didn't like what he did in the past, you have to accept he's a spent force. He's no longer carrying the weight that he has anymore. If anything, he's just dividing things, and it's going to lead to another term of that progressive government down there. And it's also, we got DeSantis on the rise. Trump is attacking him. It's going to be infighting within that party for 2 years of primaries, and somebody as senile and strange as Joe Biden might still manage to walk his way into another victory. But Trump doesn't care. It's all about his ego. It's about his future. And he will not go away. So for not reading the writing on the wall, and for coming out and saying we're going to have to put up with him in the primaries for the next year and some, Trump, you've got the Dingleberry of the Week award. Wear it well. It's sort of a Cheeto-looking Dingleberry, that one. All right, next week we got a good show as usual coming on. If people remember Derek Smith, he wrote that book, that Dr. Seuss-style book on the Prime Minister who stole freedoms. It was actually quite popular and sold very well for him. Well, he's come out with yet another one called One Face, Two Face, Black Face, Blue Face.
And just again, some good parody on the Canadian political scene in a cartoon format. I mean, if it was a pop-up book, Justin himself might actually read the thing. Who knows? You do have to sort of avoid big words with that fella who is running things in Ottawa. I'll have a whole new thing to rant about. And of course, yes, I'll offer another Dingleberry of the Week award to somebody. And of course, Jim will give us more updates on the commodities out there. And there'll be other ranting, raving, and news. So thanks for tuning in today for an extended show, guys. Hope you're all having a good one, and I'll see you next week at this time.